Blood-red Sharingan eyes peered out from the holes of the ANBU mask. Dead leaves blew in the unnatural wind sweeping through the deserted Uchiha complex. I witnessed everything. And I will continue to watch. If you so much as lay a hand on Sasuke, I will pass on classified village intel to every enemy nation. Leaving those last words, the man's cloaked frame suddenly swelled up and burst into ravens that flew away. An eerie, echoing caw filled the void. Damn you. Far from the scene that had once left Danzo in the humiliating position of being berated like an unruly academy child, he regarded the bound figure before him with burgeoning relief. On the tail end of disaster, one of the biggest threats to the Hidden Leaf had at last been neutralized. "Sis, what has become of the great Uchiha Itachi?" Danzo said, not bothering to disguise his distaste. At the sound of his voice, his prisoner raised his head. Despite the fact that he was blindfolded, the root agents at Danzo's back immediately drew their weapons. It was a pointless endeavor, the prison was virtually impossible to escape. Still, when nothing appeared to be separating Danzo and his agents from the infamous Uchiha, he would not blame them for being on edge. However, the Uchiha Itachi who had once left Danzo with a threat was no more. The man before him, shackled and bound, was a mere shadow of his previous self. Disease-ridden, from the looks of it, doubtless, a final hereditary gift from his inbreeding ancestors. At last, Danzo addressed him. "My agents tell me you have something to say to me." "My words are for the Hokage's ears only," responded Itachi, his voice hoarse and weak. "The Lord Third is busy enough as it is," Danzo lied smoothly. "Whatever you tell me will be conveyed to him." A beat passed. "So the Hokage has passed, as I feared." Danzo felt his eyebrows rise. "What leads you to that conclusion?" The barriers imprisoning Itachi had sealed off all sound as well, effectively leaving him in isolation. Uchiha Itachi had always been famed for his genius, and the less information that reached the man, the better. "I made enough of a public ruckus to ensure that news of my return would reach his ears. The fact that he isn't here can only mean he is either incapacitated, or dead. Given the circumstances surrounding this village, I would assume the latter." Danzo scoffed, it seemed his efforts had been in vain. "You Uchiha were always too clever for your own good." He spread his hands open. "It is of little matter. Speak now, or take your secrets to the grave." Beneath the blindfold, Itachi's lips quirked back in what could have been mistaken for a smile in the dim light. "Yes. I suppose it doesn't matter anymore. I came here to deliver information regarding Akatsuki, and its leader. Its true leader." Shouts sounded and the torch lights on the walls flickered. Naruto could sense several bodies rapidly descending upon them, with only one viable exit, they made no effort to hide their approach. Turning his gaze back to Karen, Naruto stepped back, drew his tanto and cut through the bars of the cell. Though he wasn't familiar with the necessary fuinjutsu to free Karen of her sealed restraints without hurting her, she would at least be able to move around, letting him concentrate on the coming battle. "Naruto. Karen, you search for Gaara," he said. "I'll take care of this." The words had just barely left his mouth when metal glinted, followed by swift movement, his pursuers were upon them already. As they came into view, the white animal masks of the ANBU hid their faces. Naruto remembered years ago, when they had last come for him. They had scooped him up, struggling, and dumped him unceremoniously in the Hokage's office, where he had learned he would become a ninja. Though he had feared them at first, they had been his allies. Lightning crackled. Naruto dispatched the first two who reached him with two swings of his tanto. The third met a similar fate, but just as the metal plunged into his chest, the man squeezed his muscles, trapping the blade. Without pause, Naruto released the hilt, and pierced through the fourth ANBU's chest with a chakra-reinforced hand. As he ripped his bloodied hand out, the fifth brushed him, and a current of lightning chakra surged through Naruto, passing to the man and frying him on the spot. The stink of singed flesh fouled the air, and the last ANBU's mask slipped off with a clatter, revealing a middle-aged man with nondescript features. For some reason, the ANBU always seemed strangely vulnerable once unmasked. Something metallic on his forehead gleamed in the torchlight. Despite himself, Naruto stared, struck by the realization that it was his first time killing a ninja that wore the same Hitachi as himself. There had been too many of them, and too little time, to have mercy, and his old self would have done it without a second thought. But suddenly, the face of the nameless Leaf agent he discovered dead in the safe house with Hinata flashed through his mind, and Naruto wondered if they had ever crossed paths before, if they had ever sat in his usual stool at Ichiraku for a bowl of miso ramen. "I've found Gaara," Karen announced, her nose wrinkling at the smell. Naruto straightened up, his gaze lingering on the face of the ANBU. Naruto. Tearing his eyes away, he motioned for her to lead. Let's go. There really was no turning back now. But he had already known this when he had made his decision. The way ahead was clear, his heart was steady. Gaara couldn't sleep. At least, not for long. Mother lurking just beyond the horizon of unconsciousness ensured that. And now, he couldn't even close his eyes. Not without seeing a sandy-haired figure staring back at him accusingly. Gaara. Stop. Not without hearing her last words ringing in his head. Something in his chest throbbed. Why had he lashed out then? Gaara couldn't stop replaying the scene in his head. Over the years, as freely as he'd killed, he'd always made sure to not lay a hand on his siblings. But why? What made them so special? There was a voice whispering in Gaara's head. It wasn't Mother's voice, it was something much quieter. It sounded like his own voice, and he didn't know what to make of it. Gaara. Metal clinked as his hands jerked up against his chains to try and block his ears. But he couldn't bring them close enough, and the chain groaned against his pulling. Stop that immediately, demanded his guard, banging on the bars of his cell with a baton. Gaara. Stop. His chains clinked, once again, to no avail. Gaara. You stop, he replied hoarsely. We're here to get you out of here. Startled, Gaara looked up. The guard's face was frozen, and behind the man, Gaara saw two faces staring back at him. One was a girl with bright red hair, and the other was the Leaf Nin who had managed to defeat him. Unlike the girl who eyed Gaara with a familiar expression of revulsion and fear, the latter wore an oddly inquisitive look on his face. As Gaara watched, the guard crumpled to the ground, and an oppressive feeling lifted from his shoulders. The barrier that had been containing his cell faded away, it seemed the rest had been similarly dispatched. Gaara focused on the Leaf Nin. Why are you helping me? The Leaf Nin stepped closer, wrapping a hand around the bars. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I'm a Jinchuriki, just like you. A Jinchuriki, while the word was new to Gaara's tongue, he was no stranger to its meaning. He had known for a long time now that there were others like him, though this was his first time coming face to face with one. However, the Leaf Nin was wrong in saying that he was just like Gaara. One look at the girl beside him, and he could tell. You're nothing like me, he said. They'd taken his gourd of sand, but far beneath them, Gaara could feel the bedrock trembling. The Leaf Nin raised his brows, and the girl beside him frowned. We don't need him, Naruto. He's unstable, he'll only slow you down. She was the one who had used those chains on him before, Gaara realized with a body-racking shudder. The red from the pool of blood around the fallen guard was seeping into his vision, and the voices in his head were growing louder. Blood. Gaara. Crack, the ground at his feet began to splinter. The Leaf Nin stepped away from the bars. I'm not here to fight you, or to win your trust. Kill them both. Gaara. Stop. If you're going to escape, go now, before backup arrives. Before they can kill us, kill them both. Stop. Stop. The whole world was almost covered in the red haze now, and Gaara felt something in his chest coiling so tightly, it burned him from the inside out. The voices in his head, the aching in his heart. It was too much. He just wanted to be alone. But it was too late. Gaara could feel the beast inside of him surging up again. His head felt like it was splitting. Get away from me, he managed to grit out, before I kill you, too. Suddenly, something hard hit the back of his neck, and he felt his eyes roll back from the impact. The world quickly turned black. The last thing he realized before he lost consciousness was the face of the Leaf Nin looming over him, and the sound of chains clinking in the darkness. Uchiha Madara. Danzo echoed in disbelief. Impossible. That is the name the man goes by, said Itachi. I have never seen his face. But I have witnessed his power, and he is a real threat to the Hidden Leaf, as well as to the rest of the world. Danzo's sharp gaze raked over his prisoner. You have gone mad. Mad? Itachi began to cough, spraying the ground with dark specks of blood. Once he had finished, his lips pushed up into a thin smile. Perhaps. But you and I both know that I speak the truth. After all, you have your own network of spies. Through their eyes, you have seen how quickly Akatsuki's influence has spread. Uchiha Madara was known for many things, but immortality was not one of them, Danzo stated evenly. He steepled his fingers together. Still, I will play your game for now. Let us say that Uchiha Madara somehow fooled the first Hokage and escaped death. What is his plan for the Jinchuriki? Most of the other members of Akatsuki are following the man calling himself Pain. They are not even aware of Madara's role as puppet master. They believe they will use the Jinchuriki to threaten the world into a time of peace. However, I believe Madara's true plan to be much more sinister than Pain's. A shadow came over Itachi's expression. That man does not have nearly as much faith in mankind. Danzo opened his mouth to respond, when a flurry of motion interrupted him. One of his subordinates suddenly appeared, his head bowed in deference. I gave orders to be left alone, he said coldly. My apologies, Hokage-sama, said his agent. But both of the Jinchuriki have escaped. The hospital had run out of space and they had hastily set up 2 medical tents in its periphery. The sound of groans was deafening, the smell of infection thickened the air. Hinata had been awake for the last 49 hours now, and her chakra levels had never been so low. She'd long since passed the maximum advised dosage of chakra pills. Somehow, they were still finding wounded throughout the village, though the surging flow had finally slowed down to a steady trickle over the past day. Except for the short break of the funeral, Hinata had worked non-stop since the end of the invasion. She had been able to save many, though a handful had been beyond any help. They're bringing in another one, cried a voice. The medic working in the bay besides Hinata grumbled, great. Another half-dead Chunin. Hinata returned her focus to her current patient. Or trying to, the floor was starting to sway beneath her feet, like a fishing boat at sea. Soon, her team leader's voice came floating from somewhere nearby. Hinata, can you take the next patient? My bays are all full. After that one, you can take a break. Yes, of course, I'm almost done, Hinata replied automatically. The needle she was pulling through the patient's scalp shook in her hand. This man needs to be seen immediately, said a new male voice. He's lost too much blood. Holding back a sigh, Hinata looked up, and froze. Dark hair, pale skin. For a moment, she thought she was once again looking into the face of Uchiha Itachi, no doubt back for vengeance. But then the floor steadied and the moment passed, and she realized the young man standing before her was a little too young and much too healthy for that to be the case. Sasuke. She started, before stopping herself. At the sound of his name, his dark eyes shot up to her in belated recognition. Hi, Nada. I didn't realize that was you. As tired as she was, Hinata didn't miss the way he'd stumbled over her name, nor did it surprise her. She'd always been a wallflower in the academy, after all. The bigger issue was, that when Hinata had turned over Uchiha Itachi to the ANBU at the hospital, they had warned her not to inform anyone of the fugitive's presence. Now, she had to wonder. Did that warning extend to the only other living Uchiha in the village? A blood-red Sharingan appeared out alone from under a leaf Hitaiate, dark blood streamed down the other side of the man's face. I tried using Koto Ematsukami to stop the coup d'etat, but Danzo stole my right eye. He doesn't trust me. He intends to protect the village on his own, by any and all means. Before that happens, let me give it to you. Sure sway. Without any hesitation, the man's fingers plunged into his eye socket. You, my best friend, are the only one I can count on. Protect this village, and the Uchiha name. The urgent news brought to Danzo, and his resultant shock, was the disruption Itachi had been waiting for. He had returned to the village fully expecting to be imprisoned. Now, with the barriers lowered and Danzo distracted, it was time for him to make his last move. Danzo had been wasting his time sealing Itachi's eyes, when he was already well and truly blind. It was the price he had willingly paid to use his Mangekyo over the years. That, and the sickness that had ravaged his body, was his punishment for his sins, a punishment far lighter than the one he deserved. Itachi felt his throat swell up, and something soft brushed his palate, and then it was gone, expelled into the open air. He could see it in his mind's eye. A crow, with Shirsue's last legacy glistening in its black feathers. What? Danzo's voice began in alarm. You will love and serve not only the Hidden Leaf Village but all of its people as well, Itachi commanded. To your dying breath, you will live by the will of fire. The crow squawked, and as the room fell silent, Itachi knew it had worked. At last, he thought. Shirsue's sacrifice hadn't all been for naught. Through the intense relief, the clock that had temporarily been frozen began to tick once more. His lungs burning up, Itachi began to cough, and the dark world around him started to spin. With another stab of pain, he felt the last of his muscles give way, and he collapsed onto the cold floor. The village was bathed in red and orange from the sun when Kakashi first heard the news. His time in the ANBU had left him with a pair of eyes and ears in every sector of the village, and it had paid off time and time again. This time was no different. The shrill cries of cicadas surged in the hot temperature as a voice whispered in his ear. His mouth turned dry. With the third gone, Kakashi had expected changes. When Danzo was announced as the successor, he'd braced himself for changes. But this was too sudden, too drastic. Naruto had broken out 2 prisoners and killed over a dozen Leaf agents in the process. Kakashi shook his head. There has to be an explanation. This makes no sense. He wouldn't do that without good reason. Tell that to the bodies I saw left behind, said the agent darkly. No word from the Hokage yet, though with this, I reckon it's going to be a kill on sight. In the distance, a loud siren began to sound. A flock of birds burst out of the nearby trees. With a salute, the agent left, leaving Kakashi alone with his increasingly frantic thoughts. Pacing back and forth, he raised a hand to his chin, and then lowered it. He looked up at the sky, and then back down at the ground. He stopped. He exhaled. Then, he bit into his thumb. Kuchios no Jutsu, summoning technique. In a cloud of smoke, several Ninken dogs appeared. At its head, a disgruntled-looking pug looked up at him in alarm. What's the matter, Kakashi? I need you all to find Naruto, he said. Now. For once, Pakken didn't protest at Kakashi's tone of voice, leaping immediately to action. The Ninken began to sniff the ground, and Kakashi was suddenly struck with the realization that he had no idea what to say if he were to confront his student. He's using clones to throw off his scent, said Pakken grimly. It'll take some time to narrow down the real one. Kakashi stopped his pacing. Of course Naruto would have had the foresight to confuse the Ninken that he wouldn't have expected any less of his student. Suddenly, Kakashi knew exactly where Naruto wanted him to be. Change of plans. Update the rest of my team on the situation, he instructed Pakken. Tell them they are not, in any circumstance, to try and chase down Naruto. Roger that. As Pakken began to swiftly race towards the village walls, Kakashi headed the other way. The majority of the villagers appeared to have no idea what was going on. Even with the village in near ruin, it seemed daily life had to press onwards. Hey, Kakashi, guy just barely managed to get out, before Kakashi passed him. The training grounds soon came into view, before passing. Another field came into view, this time, filled with rows of white tombstones. In the distance, a lone red-headed figure waited for him. As Kakashi drew closer, the figure turned around. Sensei. You came. Naruto seemed calmer than he would have expected of a newly minted fugitive on the run, but then again, it was Naruto. You're a clone, aren't you? Yes. And you're leaving? Yes. Is it true that you killed multiple Leaf agents? Naruto inclined his head. They were coming after me under Danzo's orders. Kakashi sighed, his body suddenly heavy. What a mess. Even though he had always known that the third Hokage had been the benefactor of Naruto's freedom, he hadn't expected his successor to spearhead the very opposite philosophy. It wasn't that he couldn't understand Danzo's fears, however, the thought of a Jinchuriki as powerful as Naruto running around freely would surely have made anyone break out into a sweat. His face as unreadable as ever, Naruto rested his hand on a tombstone. The light illuminated the characters carved into the smooth stone face, Hagain Rai, and for a moment, the two of them silently regarded each other. Then, Naruto spoke. Sensei, you told me once that as ninja, we have to endure. What did you mean by that? In an instant, Kakashi remembered exactly what he was referring to. When his teammates had died and Naruto had lost control over the Nine Tails, Kakashi had been frantic at the time. It seemed Naruto had taken his words to heart. We're often not as alone as we think we are, Naruto. Naruto slowly nodded. So come with me, Sensei. With Danzo as Hokage, this isn't the same hidden leaf anymore. I know you must be as tired of this system, of this world, as I am. Together, we can do something about it. The cicada's cries were louder than usual that day, or perhaps Kakashi just hadn't been listening before. Though the trees that they usually clung to were on the far end of the cemetery, their cries seemed about to swallow them. A memory, a shade flickered before Kakashi. A young boy, sitting apart from his two teammates, spoke up out of the blue. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I plan on becoming the next Hokage. Did you know, Naruto, he began. I was assigned to Kushina-san's guard when she was pregnant with you. The last time I ever saw her or Minato-sensei again was the day before the Ninetales attacked. Watching the two squabble back and forth, Kakashi chortled. You all rather remind me of my own team back in the day. Curiosity filling his expression, Naruto looked up at him. What was your team like, sensei? My teammate, Obito, died saving me. My other teammate, Rin, died at my hands. His face pinched with dismay, Naruto spread his arms wide open. Even Mayu and Rai would turn their backs on me if they knew, and you know it. Kakashi paused. I haven't turned my back on you. You're different, sensei. When I was young, my father returned from a mission in disgrace. It was too much for him to bear, and soon afterwards, he took his own life. His face contorted, Naruto clutched his chest. How do you deal with it, sensei? Kakashi inclined his head. We endure. What I'm trying to say is, what you say is true, Kakashi admitted. Through this terrible world, I've lost almost everyone I love. Then you'll come with me? Kakashi stopped. And for a long moment, he considered it. But he already knew the answer in his heart. How had they come to this moment? When had their paths first began to diverge? Those years ago, during the Chunin exams in Wind Country, when Naruto had been reeling from the side effects of the taboo seal, had Kakashi been wrong to tell him the truth? His heart heavy with regret, Kakashi shook his head. The hidden leaf needs me, now more than ever. As expected, Naruto didn't respond. The setting sun cast his shadow, dark and jagged, across the face of another tombstone, Kamizuki Mayu. While Kakashi didn't know what Naruto's plans were, from the look of newfound conviction in his eyes, it had to be something beyond anything he could think of. And it would be dangerous. Kakashi thought of how Naruto had appeared, panicked, on the battlefield to save them, and he felt a pang. As much faith as Kakashi had in his students' capabilities, as much as Naruto was a Jinchuriki, he was not indestructible. Nobody was. A word of advice for you, Naruto. Your mother and her Jinchuriki predecessor were both Uzumaki and they both used Chainstow control the Ninetales, not unlike that Karen girl. That drew a look of faint surprise from Naruto. Karen. After the hidden whirlpool was destroyed, most of the survivors moved to the hidden leaf, most, but not all. I wouldn't be surprised if Karen is one of their descendants. I'll keep that in mind. Straightening, Naruto looked at Kakashi squarely. I'm glad we were able to visit their graves together. It struck Kakashi that they were now the exact same height. We'll meet again, he said. After all, I owe you a rematch. I hope so, came the response. Goodbye, sensei. There was a note of finality to Naruto's tone, as though he had looked into the future and predetermined their fates. Their divergent paths. Where would they lead? Take care, Naruto, said Kakashi. With one last lingering look down at the graves, Naruto's clone disappeared in a gust of wind, and Kakashi suddenly found himself alone. The sirens from the village were growing louder. As the sound mixed with the shrill screams of cicadas in his ears, he realized something, that not even for a moment had he considered stopping Naruto. He didn't know how much time had passed, when the bindings that had weighed heavily on his limbs seemed to fade away. As if doused in water, his burning body grew cold, and then all of a sudden, he found himself floating in a pitch-black world. All the pain was gone. For the first time in a long time, it no longer hurt. Was this death? If so, he welcomed it. He had long since prepared himself for this moment. He had passed on all the information he had. He had completed his duty, heedless of the sacrifices laid in its wake. That had always been his greatest flaw, he thought. He could only ever see the forest and not the trees, and maybe in that aspect, he wasn't as different from his enemies as he would have liked. He did have just the one regret. Time. If only he had had just a little more of it, if only he had spent just a little less time training, and a little more with his family. But there was nothing he could do about it now. Sorry, Sasuke. Maybe next time. The sun had set, and the night was deep. A flock of birds circled the skies, their wings cutting through the air in serene silence, a sharp contrast to the current events unfolding on the ground far below. Alarms sounded from the hidden leaf, echoing through the trees outside its walls. Packs of ninkin sniffed the forest floor, leading masked ANBU in every direction away from the village. A distance away, a lone blonde woman hurtled through a dark, grassy plain, leaving behind a trail of flickering blue flames that erased her footprints. Further north, the hidden cloud had fallen silent. Its infamous clouds had retreated from the mountain range, and the smell of decay had begun to envelope the once renowned village. To the far west, smoke rose from the turrets encircling the hidden rock. Dark-eyed golems towered above its walls and drums beat steadily as every citizen, from child to elder, gathered in the village center to listen to their leader. Southwards, a team of Sannin led by a hooded puppeteer raced urgently through the moonlit dunes of their home. Finally, to the east, in a cave hidden by fog, a number of shadowy figures surrounded a mutilated body, drawing out the last of the chakra contained within. All this, the birds witnessed from above. As a low-hanging cloud passed by, the flock simultaneously tipped to the side, revealing a multitude of glowing, ringed eyes. Then, with another flap of their wings, the night swallowed them. Thanks to Naruto's clones distracting the Hidden Leaf's hunting parties, they had put enough distance between themselves and the village that they had stopped for a break. Gaara had yet to emerge from his unconscious state, and Karen was asleep, presumably exhausted from the prolonged use of her chains. Awash in the moonlight, Naruto sat wide awake. Though he was far from being alone, the forest was alive with the shuffling and scuttling of creatures carrying about their nightly routine. A large spider web spanned a tree a stone's throw away from where Naruto sat, its strands illuminated one moment before fading into darkness the next. An insect had gotten itself stuck on the web. As it squirmed, a bulbous black spider suddenly shot out and rolled it up into a knot. Naruto closed his eyes, and the world faded around him, leaving him sitting in a pitch-black space. However, here, too, he was not alone. A multitude of faces surrounded him, silent and pale. They were there because each one of them had unwittingly left a piece of themselves within him. It must have been because it was all in his mind, but for once, the words he really meant to say spilled easily from his lips. Irika-sensei, he greeted the first one, a chunin with a scar running across his face. I never had the chance to thank you for what you did. After the invasion of the Hidden Leaf, Naruto had seen Irika's name on the list of the deceased. The name had brought with it a flash of nostalgia. When Naruto had been struggling to improve in the academy, Irika had discreetly directed him to the archive library, though at the time, he hadn't realized the man's intent. You've abandoned the village, Irika's voice rang hollowly in the darkness. Where will you go now? Somewhere I can rally my defenses. Right now, his first priority was in leaving behind Fire Country and securing a position away from his pursuers. Next to Irika, stood a dark-skinned girl with spiky hair that Naruto recognized immediately. The Jinchuriki from the hidden waterfall, Fu, one of the many killed by Akatsuki. Naruto had heard she had been taken on her way back from the Chunin exams. You didn't deserve what happened to you, he said. I wish I could have saved you. Her orange eyes arched mockingly. What can you do? I have the 9 tails. I can make a difference. Besides Fu, a thin freckled woman stared at him. Her name was Kane, and she had once hired Naruto and his team for their fateful mission in Wave Country. The last he had heard of her was that she had succumbed to the wounds inflicted on her during the interrogation. My team died because of you, said Naruto. But I understand you believed your actions would bring peace. Is it even possible? She whispered. Can this cycle be ended? I don't know. But I have to try. Standing a ways back, an older woman with strands of white mixed in with her brown hair looked off into the darkness. Her expression was stern and guarded, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Even though Naruto hadn't seen her since he was a young child, he recognized her immediately. To the woman who had once been his caretaker, the woman who had been his teammate's mother, he said, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you or Mayu. I'm going to do what I can from now on to make sure something like that doesn't happen again. With her body still angled away from Naruto, the dark pupils of his ex-caretaker's eyes slowly shifted back until they met his own. Then first, you must decide. Who is your enemy? Naruto opened his eyes. The clouds shifted, and a ray of light fell across the spider web. The spider scuttled away, retreating into the shadows, and the light extended to Naruto's face. On the other side of their camp, Karen stirred and opened her eyes. Pushing herself up on her hands, she put her glasses back on and turned to him. Naruto. Is something wrong? No, I wouldn't say that. Karen fidgeted under his gaze, a faint blush tinting her cheeks. Then why are you staring? Who is your enemy? I wanted to ask you. Why did you take my hand? A look of surprise lifting her chin, Karen blinked rapidly. Because, you held your hand out to me, I guess. Why do you ask? Who is your enemy? What if I were to tell you that by following me, we were almost guaranteed to be killed? Karen's blush faded from her face, and after a moment, she sat up straight. Not if I can do something about it. Naruto looked down. You may not be able to, I'm a missing me now. So not only do we have to worry about Akatsuki, but bounty hunters from my village will be trying to chase us down. He paused. If you're having second thoughts, I won't stop you from leaving. A beat passed, and for a moment, Naruto felt his breath catch in his throat, then Karen replied, no. I made my decision as well, Naruto, to be on your side. Your enemies are my enemies now. This time, it was Naruto's turn to blink. Looking back up, he saw that even in the moonlight, Karen's hair was a fiery red. Her expression blazed equally fiercely back at him, and he thought, if they really were both Uzumaki, they were quite different. Yet somehow, they were both here in this place, at this very moment. Naruto felt the corners of his lips tug back in a smile, a motion that brought with it a lulling sense of warmth. And just a little bit of sadness. Karen's life had not been kind to her, he thought, to have led her to him. Thank you, he said. It was cold. Snow drifted down from the sky, covering the bridge in white and melting away where it touched his bare skin. A cold wind brushed against him. He shivered, but he had nowhere to go. He was all alone. The snow continued to drift by. Slowly. Serenely. Suddenly, a dark shadow fell on him, and he looked up. There was a tall man there, a ninja. Bandages covered most of his face, leaving just a pair of dark eyes. At the sight, he immediately clambered to his feet, reaching for the man. I did it, he said, his voice high and childlike. I killed Kakashi of the Sharingan. I finally avenged you. But the dark eyes only stared down at him in cold ambivalence. Who the hell are you? The words were a slap to his face, and he froze. Suddenly, he saw his raised hand, the one good hand he had left. There was something dark red on it. It was blood, he realized, and it was spreading. He watched in horror as it rapidly surged from his fingertips, to his wrist, to his arm, his shoulder, then it was in his neck, and suddenly he couldn't breathe anymore, it was strangling him, suffocating him, and the entire world was beginning to turn red. Haku's eyes flew open and he sat up, a silent scream splitting his lips. His heart was pounding in its ribcage, his skin cold with sweat. He looked around at his surroundings wildly, searching, but the world was no longer red. It was not snowing either. It was dark, and the air was heavy with humidity. Haku, a high voice cut in. Are you okay? Letting out a rattling exhale, Haku closed his eyes, clearing his thoughts and collecting himself. Yes. I'm alright. Since leaving the Hidden Leaf with their mysterious new ally, they had taken a roundabout route in order to throw off any possible pursuers. So far, however, they had been left alone. Her gaze still searching him suspiciously, his teammate Ajisai frowned. If you say so. At the sight of her face, Haku felt his stomach twist guiltily. She had declined Kabuto's offer to heal her broken nose with medical ninjutsu, and the swelling was only now starting to gone down. Speaking of which, Haku and Ajisai seemed to be the only ones around. Where did Kabuto go? He said he was going to scout the area. Something about searching for the hidden pathway. Haku raised an eyebrow. A hidden pathway. Can we really trust him? Who's to say he isn't just leading us into a trap? For some reason, Ajisai seemed perturbed by his words, her eyes flickering uneasily away from him. If he was going to do that, he would have done it while we were still in enemy territory. I hope you're right. Ajisai hesitated, and then said quietly, if only Suiren was here, we'd know for sure. Suddenly, she grew very still. He's coming back. Ajisai had discreetly placed a tracker on their mysterious guide near the beginning of their journey, and they had been careful to talk only when Kabuto was outside of hearing range. The bushes in front of them parted, and Kabuto strode into the clearing. As Ajisai surged forward to address him, Haku hung back. Now that he'd regained some semblance of control over himself, it felt strange being there. He'd never thought about what he would do after he had gotten his revenge for Zabuza. Ever since that red-headed leaf Nin had spared him in Wave Country, Haku had considered himself a dead man living on borrowed time. When the man with the snake had marked him, he'd thought his luck had finally ran out. And yet, against all odds, he was still here, a mercenary from the Hidden Mist, masquerading as an agent of the Hidden Rain. A guide's going to be meeting us, said Kabuto. They'll be taking us the rest of the way to meet your leaders. Ajisai's eyes lit up. Lady Angel. As his teammate's frame visibly loosened up, to his surprise, a sense of relief also washed through Haku, followed shortly by a stab of revulsion. It seemed his years of pretending to be an Nin hadn't quite left him untouched by the Akatsuki's brainwashing. Still, Zabuza had once worked for Akatsuki before meeting his demise. Haku raised a hand to his covered shoulder. At some point since they had left the village, the seal on his body had almost completely disappeared. The little he knew about Fuinjutsu told him that it was possible that the man who'd put the seal on him had died. Likely, he had been killed in the raging battle at the Hidden Leaf. But somehow, Haku didn't think that was quite the case, as he could still feel a tiny presence on his shoulder. Though much smaller than it had been, it was still there, darkly pulsating. What could it mean? Sasuke's team was in shambles. There was really no better word to describe it. Immediately following Naruto's escape, they'd all been brought into the intelligence division for intense questioning. While it soon became clear that they didn't know anything, the situation worsened when Kakashi refused to have his memory probed. He was taken away, and the remainder of their team was immediately put on house arrest with their ranks suspended. 15 hours had passed since then without their receiving word from anyone on the outside, and Sasuke was about to explode. Meanwhile, the entire situation had left Sakura, already on the verge of a breakdown since the news of Ino's death, curled up on the ground in the fetal position, mumbling nonsensically to herself. Even Menma, usually a ball of energy and source of non-stop mindless chatter, hadn't spoken a word since their house arrest, though that may have been because at some point in the investigation, he'd gotten his mouth duct taped shut. As for Sasuke, he didn't know what to think. Naruto, killing a dozen Leaf agents? Well, that, he could believe. Or at the very least, he believed Naruto was fully capable of having done it. But more importantly, Kakashi, his sensei, an accomplice? That was impossible, and he would swear it on his clan's crest if it came to it. Unfortunately, nobody cared what Amir Chunin thought, and once again, Sasuke felt frustration roiling in the pit of his stomach. Thud. Thud. His eyes furious and wet above the duct tape, Menma appeared to have turned the entire wall by the door into his personal punching bag. And as pointless as it was, Sasuke was on the verge of joining him when the doors suddenly opened and a masked ANBU stepped in. Uchiha Sasuke. He lowered his fist. That's me. The Hokage wishes to talk to you. The ANBU looked pointedly around the room at his teammates. Just you. As they traveled south, the forest land gave way to an expanse of salt flats that reflected the night sky. Looking down at what appeared to be stars glimmering under her feet, Karen felt her breath catch. She'd never seen such a beautiful sight before. Looking coyly over at Naruto, she felt her cheeks heating up. Somehow, in the span of a few weeks, she had gone from having fat, ugly grass Nin draining her chakra to accompanying her crush under a starry night sky. How romantic, she thought. She was so lucky. Suddenly, something at her back stirred, rudely dragging her out of her fantasies. Gaara. Holding back a sigh, she warned Naruto, he's waking up. Her chakra chains had been holding Gaara midair throughout their journey. The two of them came to an abrupt stop, sloshing the water at their feet. Through the entangled chains, Gaara's dark-rimmed eyes were already wide open, regarding them in clouded confusion. Where am I? He struggled briefly to no avail. Where are you taking me? Gaara, Naruto began calmly. You were losing control in the cell, and I decided to bring you with. I told you, Gaara snarled. If you don't leave me alone, I'll kill you. Annoyed, Karen sniffed. I'd like to see you try. Her chains tightened around Gaara, who let out a low growl. Karen, said Naruto. With a sigh, she loosened her chains by a fraction. Gaara immediately jerked forward, but the chains remained bound around his form. Realization dawning upon his face, his back arched, his face contorted, lips drawing back to reveal his teeth, and Gaara let out a scream. It was angry and hateful, but nothing like the screams Karen had heard back in the Leaf Village. With her chains sealing away Gaara's tailed beast, the scream was solely human, and it soon petered away into nothing. Finally, facing the night sky, Gaara muttered in a dark voice, I'm going to kill you. I have to. I have to. Frowning, she turned to Naruto. He's not going to come around, you know. Words have no effect on him. Suddenly, Naruto walked past her. Before she could cry out in warning, he'd raised a hand and gripped one of the chains binding Gaara. You're a Jinchuriki. The Akatsuki will be coming after you soon. You have two choices, you can choose to stay with us, and pray to survive another day. Or you can choose to leave, and die when they extract your tailed beast from you. The decision is up to you. Karen swallowed, she could feel the chakra and the chain straining under the force that Naruto was exerting. I choose to kill you, Gaara spat. I choose to listen to your screams as I rip you apart. Naruto paused, and then released the chain. Karen, let him go. Are you sure? He's out of immediate danger here. And I need your sensory abilities more than I need him. Despite the rising gravity of the situation, Karen flushed with pleasure. It was true that when her chains were activated, she was unable to use her mind's eye to sense anything. She shot a look back at Gaara. Though his body was relaxed, judging from the murderous look in his eyes, she wouldn't have been surprised if he made good on his promise the instant he was freed. Letting him go here was akin to releasing a rabid animal into the open. Still, Naruto was there with her. Closing her eyes, Karen traced the outline of her chakra that connected her to Gaara. Though she wasn't exactly sure why it had taken the form of chains, somehow, it felt the most natural to her. She called it back now, and with a clinking sound, it began to unfurl itself. When the chains had completely disappeared back into Karen, her senses returned, and she found herself once again surrounded by two monstrous chakra signatures. Shivering, she opened her eyes, only to realize that somehow, Gaara had disappeared. In his place, a rising wall of sand glistened in the moonlight. There was no time to run, it was already surging towards them. Karen felt her eyes begin to widen, her body frozen in place, her mind replaying the scene of the genin in the Chunin exams that had died from sand exploding through his body, and she thought, this is it. What followed next happened in the blink of an eye. One moment, Naruto was standing next to Karen, the next, there was something that could only be described as an explosion. Unbearable heat and wind buffeted her face, and the wall of sand crumbled apart. Coughing through the resulting cloud of dust, Karen could make out two figures on the ground. It was Naruto. He had pinned Gaara to the ground, both with a hand to the throat and also with a pressure so suffocating, it stopped the shout in Karen's throat. As the air cleared, his changed features grew more apparent, his red hair fell to his shoulders, and the whisker marks on his face had grown pronounced, giving him a more feral appearance. Naruto's voice, however, was steely calm. You won't hurt her. I won't let you. Seemingly unable to move, Gaara's eyes bulged in anger. Why? We're both Jinchuriki. We have the same eyes. So what's the difference between you and me? The difference is that I know who my enemy is, said Naruto. Blood trickled down from the corner of Gaara's lip, and he let out a maniacal laugh. Anyone who isn't me is my enemy. The whole damn world is my enemy. Was your sister your enemy, too? Gaara's laugh cut off sharply. His eyes narrowed. Shut up. Shut up. Naruto ignored him. You did kill her, after all. Shut up. Her name was Temari, wasn't it? She was a good shinobi. She didn't deserve to die that way. She was just trying to stop you. The ground around them began to shake, and Gaara's voice dropped to a cold whisper. Nobody can stop me. Nobody will stop me. And yet here we are. Though nothing changed in Naruto's expression, suddenly, impossibly, the pressure in the air doubled. The ground fissured with a loud crack, and Karen stumbled, her pulse drumming in her ears. Then, without warning, the pressure faded away, gone as quickly as it had arrived. Pulling back, Naruto reached up to his forehead and loosened his hitayate. For a moment, he gripped it in his hand. Then, he dropped it, letting it land with a splash at his feet. If you ever find yourself in need of an ally, he said. Come find us. Gaara didn't respond. Naruto began to move, and Karen followed him, looking back only once to see Gaara's lone figure becoming smaller and smaller in the distance, before disappearing completely. Once the ANBU had delivered Sasuke to the Hokage's office, to his surprise, the agent bowed and backed out of the room. The door slammed resoundingly shut, leaving behind just Sasuke, and the man known as Shimura Danzo, who was currently seated behind the desk, wearing the hat that bore his new status as the 5th Hokage. A single dark eye regarded him from a face swathed in bandages. Sasuke wondered passingly whether he had lost his other eye in battle. He didn't know much about the man, only that he had been one of the Third's advisors. The minutes began to tick by in silence. Nonplussed, Sasuke remained still, determined not to give anything away. Suddenly, Danzo spoke. Do you know why you're here? His voice had the low, raspy quality of someone intimate with silence. Sasuke scowled. Where's Kakashi-sensei? Once the intelligence division has determined he knows nothing of the Jinchuriki's escape, he will be allowed to return to his duties. You're torturing him. So long as he doesn't resist the interrogation, such methods will not be necessary. Touch a single hair on his head, said Sasuke. And we'll see how long you stay in this office. Danzo didn't look impressed. Watch your tongue, boy. That mulish pride was once your clan's undoing. I wouldn't be so hasty as to try and follow in your family's footsteps. Sasuke felt the heat rise in his face, and took a step forward. I am the 5th Hokage. I will be addressed as such. Though Danzo hadn't raised his voice, Sasuke felt a chill that quickly quashed his temper. It suddenly struck him that while he may have never heard anything of Danzo's skill or accomplishments, all this meant was that he knew absolutely nothing about the other man. And on the battlefield, an ignorant shinobi was as good as dead. Kakashi-sensei would never betray the village. Hokage-sama, he gritted out. Nor do I know anything that could possibly help you find Naruto. To his surprise, Danzo replied, I know. I did not call you here to ask you of the Jinchuriki. Then why? While Kakashi is, or was, I should say, famed for his use of the Sharingan, he never did manage to utilize it to its full extent. Danzo paused. It is about time you were properly trained. Taken aback, Sasuke blurted out, trained? By who? But he needn't have asked. Before Danzo even spoke again, he knew the answer. By me, said Danzo, steepling his fingers together. I will be your teacher. A torrent of rain welcomed their entry into Rain Country, and as droplets slid down Haku's bare face, he felt a shiver run down his back. Though they were nowhere near the village, back in the rain, it almost felt as though a pair of eyes was trained on his back. Now back in familiar territory, it quickly became clear that their newfound guide was not going to follow the great river to the hidden rain as they'd expected. When they caught their first glimpse of high-rising mountains in the distance, instead of terrain flattening out to marshland, Ajisai came to a screeching stop. Where are you taking us? She demanded, a hand creeping to her pouch. Are you really our ally? With a look at his teammate, Haku followed suit, drawing Senba needles in a flash. Kabuto turned around, his hands raised. I didn't lie. I'm taking you to your leaders. And where would that be? We're nearby, said Kabuto. The guide is going to meet us to take us the rest of the way. Ajisai's expression grew cool. Well, if you're really not lying, then you won't mind this. Before Kabuto could react, Haku flicked his wrists. The thin needles flew through the air, embedding themselves in Kabuto's chest. Taut string, barely perceptible to the naked eye, connected the needles to Haku. These needles will tell me whether you're lying or not, he explained. When Kabuto's eyes bulged, he added, don't worry, they're thin enough that they won't kill you, unless you move around too much. Now, said Ajisai, drawing closer. Let's do that again. That won't be necessary, came a new voice. Alarmed, Haku's head turned just in time to catch something blue fly through the air, a bird, before landing on the shoulder of a girl emerging from the rising fog. Where had she come from? Haku hadn't sensed her at all. While she was dressed in dark Akatsuki robes, she couldn't have been more than Haku's age, if not younger. With her bright orange hair and the series of piercings in her face, he was quite sure he had never seen her before. And yet, something about her features left him feeling deeply unsettled. What's going on? Who are you? Haku asked. A pair of ringed eyes turned towards him. You do not recognize your god. It was a girl's voice, but at the sound of it, Ajisai let out a loud gasp before immediately lowering herself to her knees. Lord Pain, she murmured in reverence. In a flash, Haku thought of the stories his mother had once told him when he was young, in particular, the story of a faceless being that stole children's faces and wore them as masks. Though the stories had referred to it as a god, in his nightmares, it had always looked more like that of a demon. The girl beckoned towards them, her pale face devoid of all human emotion. Follow me, and all will be revealed. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.